do this. Well, hello all, welcome back to the show. It's so exciting because today we've got another character profile for you guys. Yep, straight off the back of our first character profile, we're going straight in for another one. So our first character profile was called on Kip Grady. So no prizes! No prize for guessing who the second person gets to be in the character profile. Yep, we're doing my hockey husband. It's Scott Hunter. It's Scott's turn. So those are remind you guys with the character profiles and all that. So the character profiles, we just basically just do a full-blown profile of the character. And then on a separate episode, we'll do my own personal thoughts and opinion of that said character in more of a review way. Okay? So today's going to be Scott's profile. And we'll do our thoughts on another time. Okay? So, we get it all set up and ready to go. Yep. So here we go. Let's get stuck into Scott's character profile, shall we? Here we go. Scott Hunter is the star centre and team captain of the New York Admirals and the first openly gay hockey player in the fictional NHL. He is the protagonist of Game Changer, which follows his relationship with juice bar barista Kip Grady. His decision to come out as gay by kissing Kip, his then boyfriend, now husband, after winning the Stanley Cup, is a landmark event for gay players in the NHL. Off the ice, he is an activist for inclusivity in hockey and co-owns the Kingfisher with Kip. Scott is one of the few characters to either appear or be directly mentioned in all Game Changers books, making him the second most frequent character in the series. Scott was born in June or July 1988 in Rochester, New York. No information about his father is known, but he grew up dirt poor with his single mother. As a child, Scott was a latchkey kid, cooking dinner for himself and his mother while she worked late at a grocery store, and later taking care of her when she fell ill. Scott's mother was a very generous and kind person, traits which she instilled in her son. She was deeply supportive of Scott's hockey aspirations, sacrificing a lot of time and money for second-hand gear. Scott's mother died in 2003 from an unknown illness when he was 15. Scott received a scholarship to a boarding school with a hockey program when he was 14. He played junior hockey in Quebec for 2 seasons, where he visited with a family. He would shovel the snow from their driveway in the winter and learned some French from his time in Quebec. It was around this time that Scott began to question his sexuality and realised he was gay, and had an unrequited crush on a teammate, Jacob. He believed Jacob shared his crush, but neither of them ever dared act on their desire. Later, Scott received a full ride to a college for hockey and played the college level for 2 seasons. Scott never finished college and does regret this, believing his mother would have wanted him to graduate. He never committed to a major, studying a little bit of everything, as the school never cared what he studied. In 2008, Scott was drafted to the NHL by the York Admirals at 20 years old. Not much is known about his early career, but he quickly became New York's star player and an icon in New York City, particularly due to his high-profile brand deals and reputation as an All-American captain. Sometime before the Olympics, he becomes the captain of the Admirals and an NHL All-Star. In 2014, Scott was chosen to captain Team USA's men's hockey team at the Sochi Winter Games, playing with fellow Admiral Carter Bourne. They run into Shane Harder there with Team Canada, and the three spend time at the beach talking about the coming games, lamenting about the room conditions and going to the figure skating and speed skating. When Carter mentions the bravery of the homosexual athletes in these sports, Scott falls quiet, something noticed by Shane. Scott captains Team USA to victory at this Olympics. As his career continued, Scott felt increasingly like his life belonged to too many other people and not himself. He began struggling with not having anyone or anything that was his and his alone, as well as a kind of loneliness, with most of his teammates married with families. Over the summer breaks, Scott travelled to places where people didn't know a damn thing about hockey, like Italy, Spain, Brazil, and Greece, where he can have anonymous sex with men. He fears being outed due to the culture of the NHL and hides his sexuality, like all gay hockey players at this point. The last time he hooks up with someone who isn't Kip is August 2016 on a trip to Torremolinos, Spain. Scott has a terrible start to the 2016-17 season, not scoring a goal for nearly 2 months, and some of his key sponsors such as Gillette and Under Armour questioning if they will renew their sponsorship next year. Scott's agent is anxious. Scott goes for a run and decides to buy a smoothie. Here he meets juice bar barista Kip Grady at Strawberry. Scott asks for a drink suggestion and buys Kip's suggestion of a blue moon over Brooklyn. The two make eyes at each other and flirt, and Scott leaves a large tip. That night, Scott scores a hat-trick plus 2 assists against Washington. Deeply superstitious, Scott repeatedly goes to Strawberry for a blue moon over Brooklyn from Kip. He gives Kip his personal tickets to that night's game against Tampa Bay. Scott and Kip click immediately, both having crushes on each other that they're not able to totally explain. In February 2017, they met again at a fundraiser for a children's hospital, where Kip was working as a server and Scott was speaking. The two decide to slip out for a burger after Kip finishes his shift. Not having time to go home, Scott goes to a bodega and buys a bunch of tourist merchandise to wear instead of his tuxedo. They get to know each other and confirm that it is definitely a date, eventually skipping out and hooking up at Scott's Lower East Side apartment. Scott bottoms and is disappointed when Kip makes to leave. He invites him to stay and they talk about themselves more in bed. Kip and Scott continue to see each other and hook up, falling more and more in love. Scott loses to the Boston Raiders, being baited into punching Ilya Roznov when he says he's disappointed as he heard Scott was good at hockey again. Scott and Kip share Valentine's Day together, with Scott making Italian at his apartment. Kip gives him blue socks as they remind him of the colour of blueberries, and Scott promises to wear them on the road and think of Kip. They have sex multiple times, and the next morning, Carter calls with the shocking news that their teammate Frank Zulo has been arrested. He runs to an emergency team meeting where his teammates chirp him for getting laid last night. Scott tries his best to support his team following the Zulo situation, himself being incredibly frustrated and angry, spending a lot of time in the gym to cope. Once Zulo is released, Scott visits him in his apartment, telling him that despite Scott not liking Zulo at all, Scott hopes he's able to get better and urges him to enter the AHL's rehab program. Later that month, the Admirals beat the Brooklyn Scouts, but Scott dives in front of the puck to stop a shot on goal, going down hard as the puck hits his stomach. Although he's only bruised, Kip fusses over him and Scott is smitten. In Scott and Kip's relationship, a growing point of contention is Scott's fear of being outed. He is envious of Carter's relationship with actress Gloria Gray, who, similarly to Scott, was keeping it a secret. But once they were found by paparazzi, Carter did not face the same consequence that Scott would. Carter and Todd try to get Scott to bring a date to the upcoming Equinox Gala. Kip attends the gala with his friend Elena, and Scott and Kip skirt around each other, trying not to be seen together, but unable to not flirt. Scott dances with Elena, and she grills him about his intentions with Kip. Scott and Kip leave the gala separately and dance in Scott's apartment, fantasizing about going on public dates. They say I love you to each other before Scott leaves for his road trip. They have phone and FaceTime sex while on the road. They celebrate Kit's birthday in March, where Scott suggests holidaying to one of his anonymous getaways. He is recognized while at dinner with Kip and hates it. Scott later tries to gift Kip $50,000 to pay off his student loan, and Kip refuses to accept. They argue, Kip furious at Scott. Scott is dumbfounded and apologizes. He doesn't go with Kip to the Kingfisher for his birthday drinks with his friends. In an effort to fix the situation, Scott takes Kip to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and Kip reveals he's applied for grad school. Scott is recognized, and people ask for photographs, and they run back to the apartment. In Kit's words, to hide. Photos of the two of them leak online, and Scott freaks out and says they never should have gone. Kip feels more and more like a dirty hidden secret, and is upset when he is not invited to an Admirals team dinner with their wives and girlfriends. Tension grows with Kip feeling trapped and isolated in Scott's apartment, and Scott distant as the Admirals progress through the playoffs. Kip feels like he can't share any of his problems with Scott, and Scott is distracted by the playoffs and doesn't notice his relationship struggling with Kip, avoiding him. Kip admits to Scott he feels like an illicit affair and that Scott's ashamed of him and he doesn't want to pressure Scott to come out. He admits he might and be able to continue in secret. Kip walks out on Scott. The Admirals kick Boston out of the playoffs, and Scott is losing sleep, mad at himself and miserable. He reevaluates how he's treated Kip and tries to imagine coming out. Scott loses it and brutally beats up a Dallas player after he calls him a slur. Back in New York, Scott apologizes and Kip and they discuss their feelings. Kip promises to wait until after the playoffs are over to make any big changes. At a playoff game in Detroit, Scott goes to the hotel pool and contemplates his relationship, admitting that accepting his relationship makes him a better person and better player, and that he wants people to know they're together. He calls his agent Todd at midnight and comes out as gay. Todd tries to dissuade him from announcing it, but then helps strategize with him. The next day, Scott gathers his best friends, Greg Huff, Carter Bourne, and Eric Bennett, and comes out. They all promise to support Scott and hug and ask about Kip. Scott turns up on Kip's parents' doorstep and introduces himself as Kip's boyfriend. He later comes out to Coach Murdoch, who takes the news well as talks about his experience as one of the first black hockey players. New York plays the Stanley Cup final against LA, a difficult game. Scott scores the game-winning goal with 2 minutes left in the third. The Admirals winning 3-2. The team celebrates on the ice, and Scott is announced as the playoff MVP. Finally, Scott is handed the Stanley Cup as captain and raises it, dedicating the win to his mother. The ice begins to fill with wives, girlfriends, and children. Scott finds Kip in the crowd and gestures from him to come to the penalty box. Scott pulls him onto the ice and kisses him in front of everyone. Kip joins the dressing room celebrations afterwards, and the world reacts to Scott's coming out. At the AHL Awards in June, Scott is awarded the Conn Smythe and Hart trophies. In his acceptance speech, Scott addresses being gay in hockey and all the messages he has received thanking him. He goes out to a Scott Hunter night at a local gay bar with some teammates and Ilya Roznov. Scott's decision to come out publicly has a significant impact on the rest of the Game Changers series and is the catalyst for change within the AHL. Following Game Changer, Scott is viewed as brave, being the first openly gay AHL player. Other players begin coming out, still facing backlash and difficulty, but many characters feel as if a new age has started. Scott and Kip spend their first Christmas together with Kip's family. They get engaged in November 2019 and have their engagement party at the Kingfisher. Eric observes that Scott is much happier now he's open and with Kip. Scott and Kip are deeply in love with, with characters such as Kyle Swift, resentful at how perfect they seem. Scott is described as very beautiful man. He is blonde haired and blue eyed with a very muscular build and standing 6'4" tall. He is considered muscular even among hockey players with broad shoulders, trim waist, and a great ass. Kip initially describes him as the hottest man in the world and volcanic, and he had done ads for Hugo Boss and GQ. He has previously been in People's 15 Most Beautiful People issue, and Kyle describes him as how he'd always imagined Achilles. Scott Hunter is referred to as an incredibly kind and caring man numerous times by multiple characters across the Game Changers universe. He is genuinely considered to be one of the nicest men in the AHL and is a poster child for inclusivity and gay athletes. Scott takes hockey and his role of leader very seriously, plays through his injury like many players. Embarrassed and ashamed when he's a bad role model after beating the Dallas player in Game Changer. Goes to see Zula, leaves Valentine's Day with Kip to deal with the Zula situation. Incredibly private, helping other players, comforting Aslan after a terrible game. Like many hockey players, Scott is superstitious about his games. A game goes well, he will try to replicate what happened that day, which is what leads him to meeting Kip again at Stormberry. He believes in fate and that things happen for a reason. Likes to be in places he's comfortable and rarely goes outside of his comfort zone, i.e., holding a engagement party at Kingfisher. Love for Kip pushed him out of his comfort zone for the very first time, i.e., coming out, pushing NHL dressing rules, makes up time hiding by hanging out at the Kingfisher. As a hockey player, he is deeply generous, donating extensively to charities, visiting hospitals, and helping his teammates. Something that is frequently highlighted by in articles about Scott. Children's hospitals are a particular favourite charity of his, and he attends fundraisers and galas. He wants to start a charity supporting gay children and joins the Game Changers hockey camp as a coach. Kip Grady. Scott and Kip's relationship begins when closeted Admirals captain Scott Hunter becomes a regular at Kip Grady's smoothie shop during a scoring slump, drawn first by the superstition and then by Kip himself. After a few visits and some mutual pinging, Scott finally asks Kip out. One date leads straight into bed, and they fall into a fast but quietly domestic relationship where Kip spends most nights at Scott's penthouse while still working food service jobs and procrastinating grad school. The early book dynamic is very soft, boyfriend energy. Scott is shy, kind, a bit oblivious, and deeply devoted, but he insists they stay private because he has never been out even to family. As the hockey season progresses, the secrecy stops feeling romantic and starts to hurt. Kip, who is out and supported by his parents and friends, hates lying about where he spends his time and feels increasingly like a secret. Scott is ashamed of rather than a partner Scott is proud of. Scott loves Kip but keeps dodging any public acknowledgement. No +1 at events, no hand holding in public, no soft launch on social media, no no soft. There we go. Got it tripped on there. No soft launch on social media, so tension simmers. There we go. Under their otherwise loving domestic routine, when the Admirals' playoff run intersects with Shane and Ilya's storyline from his rivalry, Scott's internal pressure hits a breaking point. He wants both his career and his boyfriend, and the closet is making that impossible. The big turning point in the book comes late when Scott starts to deliberately choosing Kip over fear. He comes out to a few teammates, begins meeting Kip's family properly, and quietly resolves that he will come out publicly after the season, even if it costs him fans or sponsors. When the Admirals win the Stanley Cup, knocking Ilya's team out along the way, Scott kisses Kip on the ice in front of cameras, becoming the first AHL player to do so, and becoming the first openly gay superstar, and turning their secret relationship into a public love story that directly inspires Shane and Ilya's own decisions about coming out. Putting Scott out of his comfort zone and hiding. Grady family. In the books, Scott's relationship with Kip's family is warm, awkward, and ultimately very loving. And it becomes a key step in Kip no longer feeling like a secret. When Scott first shows up unannounced at their Brooklyn home after a big game, Kip tries to introduce him as a friend, but Scott gently corrects him and tells Kip's mom that he is actually Kip's boyfriend, which shocks her in a good way and immediately changes the tone of the visit. Scott stays for dinner, is nervous but unpainfully polite, and by the end of the night he has clearly won them over. So later stories and the Christmas epilogue show him spending holidays at their house, folding into their traditions and being treated as another member of the family rather than a celebrity guest. So, York Admirals, Carl Bourne, assistant captain, dating Gloria Gray. Carter thinks Scott and Kip should have married in 2018. Eric Bennett, Frank Zulub. Other players in the league are aware of Scott's dislike of Zula, with Ilya and Shane discussing it between each other when the Zula news dropped. He was a boring, good at hockey punch. So again, like how with relationships towards the end of Kip's character profile can't give me a little smile, the same does with Scott's. So it's like the source material is literally deliberately putting one to make me feel like a little smudge, like or like a little relief. There's like, and the whole works down because like I said, these character profiles are going to be so much hard work. There's going to be so much reading to do. There's going to be times where I will trip up every now and then, but that's fine. It's not a big deal. We don't need to make these shows perfect, okay? Just the fact that we're making them is what matters. But there you go. That is Scott Hunter's character profile done and dusted. Like I said, in the future, we will have an episode where I'll give you my full personal opinions and thoughts about him in like a review. But that is going to be it for Scott Hunter's character profile. So thank you for joining us until next time. That's game.